And we are live. As always, we are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn free, civilly disobedient media. Today we're broadcasting live in scenic Cambridge, Massachusetts. It's a spectacular day. We were with these folks just a few short weeks ago. It was bitter cold, great turnout today. And again, the weather, it's God's will we're here today. I'll just leave it at that as we approach the Easter season. Yesterday, however, it was a day that will long live in ignominy in world history as well as American history. Yesterday, and effectively today, marks the 6th anniversary, if you will, of the beginning of the American financed genocide that's taking place in Yemen right now. This was a day that the Saudis, again, armed, financed, endorsed, encouraged by both Raytheon and the American government, decided to make war on a simple nation filled with peace-loving people. And what's happened in terms of atrocities, again, American-financed atrocities, and I'm pounding that into folks for a simple reason. You know, I'll quote an age-old cartoon. I have seen the enemy, and he is us. And we no longer should look to outside sources, outside bogeymen, you know, created evils, fictionalize reasons for being involved in the decimation, if you will, of Yemen. We should take no joy as the Saudis, using our weapons, essentially decimate a population, driving an already poor nation literally into the Middle Ages. And folks who have listened to me over the years know that words don't often fail me. I'm just not sure how I can be more provocative. Joining me, as always, are the folks from Mass Peace Action. I'm going to allow them to define, if you will, the membership and the organization that they've built in terms of a coalition. But Brian Garvey is here with Mass Peace Action. Brian, again, great turnout today. Very effective positioning. Folks in everyday lives. And we lead, we're blessed here in the United States, obviously. We lead lives of great comfort. All you're doing is, in a very polite yet firm way, interrupt, if you will, this perfect Saturday for folks to reflect, particularly as we enter holy season for many of the world's major religions, that not all is as it seems. Despite the tragedies here in the United States with COVID and the pandemic, there are far greater tragedies happening around the world. The biggest part of the tragedy is that it's thoroughly self-inflicted by an American government, by an American arms manufacturer. We can't avoid COVID. COVID occurred naturally. We, however, a stroke of a pen can end our attack on Yemen. What are your thoughts today? Tell us about the coalition, your organizations involved, and the importance of this weekend.
So yes, I think you laid it out quite well, Pat. My name is Brian Garvey. I'm with Massachusetts Peace Action. We're the largest peace organization in Massachusetts, and we are dedicated to fighting that evil that Martin Luther King called it one of the 3 evils, militarism. And the fact that we have prioritized the needs, not of our people here in the United States or the people of the world, but the needs of executives at companies like Raytheon to make a profit year in and year out. And that's why we spend more than half of our tax dollars on war, when our people desperately need relief from COVID. They need jobs, we need infrastructure. But what do we have money for? Endless war and funding atrocities overseas. So just a couple of years ago, we joined in with several other organizations, including the Veterans for Peace, now Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, who are very well represented today. Some faith groups, like the Quakers, the Friends Meeting at Cambridge is a member of this group. Code Pink's another great member that chips in with the Raytheon campaign. And we did that to raise awareness of the worst humanitarian catastrophe in the world today. And that is the war in Yemen, which unfortunately had a sad anniversary 6 years ago. It started. And that's an important thing to remember, because 6 years ago means that this war started under the Obama administration. It continued and intensified during the Trump administration. And now, despite the fact that Joe Biden has said that he wants to end the war in Yemen, it continues. And every day of the Biden administration, Saudi Arabia and their allies have continued to use American weapons and planes to devastate the people of Yemen, one of the poorest countries in the world. Now, I thought what you laid out really well earlier is you were trying to find a reason for all this. What is the reason why the United States, a democracy, is selling billions of dollars of high-tech weaponry to one of the most authoritarian regimes in the world? Literally an absolute monarchy that beheads people in the town square. Crucifixion is still part of the legal code in Saudi Arabia. They murder journalists like Jamal Khashoggi, who was a U.S. resident and a Washington Post reporter. Why on earth is the United States, a country that prides itself, disingenuously, let me say, on supporting human rights, be selling billions of dollars of high-tech weapons to one of the worst human rights abusers in the world? And the reason for us is just up the street. Raytheon Technologies, one of the largest weapons makers in the world, has a facility right around the corner. They're headquartered, this institution, right here in Massachusetts, in Waltham, in Blue, Massachusetts, one of the most militaristic and war profiteering institutions. Raytheon is right here in Wales. And so we're not bombing Yemen to make the people of the United States safe, or really to achieve any geopolitical goal. Bottom line, I think the reason why we continue to do this is because we sell guns and bombs, and Saudi Arabia buys guns and bombs. And we are addicted to maintaining the profits of companies like Raytheon, who have massive influence and presence in Democratic and Republican administrations alike. That's what we're committed to doing. Not taking care of our people here, not supporting human rights, but making sure that the executives of those companies, like Raytheon, like Boeing, like Lockheed Martin, get rich every year. And consequences be damned.
I want to point out that there are two pressure points that average Americans can apply. First and foremost, obviously, is President Joseph Biden, who, as you pointed out, campaigned on ending the atrocities that are happening literally as we speak in Yemen. A second point, and this is actually potentially being addressed in the coming weeks in Rhode Island, is that institutional investors hold a disproportionate share of the voting stock in Raytheon Corporation. Institutional investors can vote with their feet. Institutional investors, in very much the same manner that we, as citizens of conscience, advocated for during apartheid in the days of Nelson Mandela, can force American institutions to divest from a company whose sole focus seems to be, again, mass war, mass genocide, mass death. Now, my understanding in the state of Rhode Island is there is potentially legislation being introduced this week that would force the state of Rhode Island to divest from Raytheon. Let's think about that for a second, because in the case of both Massachusetts and Rhode Island, Raytheon holds a disproportionate share, if you will, of the economic hearts and minds of each state. They're significant employers, but certainly none of us are going to have the opportunity to sit down at a table across from these folks, including the freshly minted Secretary of Defense, a.k.a. Mr. Raytheon. Right? They're not going to be able to sit across from them, but we can sure as hell hit them in the shorts where it counts, and that's their stock price. Because ultimately, it's either going to have to happen at the cost of their profit, or it's going to have to happen in terms of their stock price. As citizens of conscience, the potential for hitting them hard is in the stock price. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that focusing on the bottom line for a company like Raytheon is a good place to focus, because I think that's what they care about.
Right.
They don't care about the people of Yemen. They don't care about depriving the people of the United States of the resources that they need. They care about the stock price.
Right.
They care about their bonuses. They care about profits coming in year after year, and the military budget getting bigger and bigger. They care about being able to maintain those weapons deals no matter what the people that we sell those weapons do with them.
Right.
So I think it's really a good idea to target the bottom line, to make a stink at those investors meetings,
Right.
to try and get your state legislature, you people down in Rhode Island. I think that's fantastic. We have filed a bill in the Massachusetts state legislature to try and get our pension fund divested from Raytheon and other companies selling weapons to create the greatest humanitarian crisis of our time. This is the Holocaust of our time, let's be clear. And we cannot just stand by and continue to support it.
Right.
I think you're absolutely right. You made me think of something that Gregory Hayes, who was the CEO of Raytheon Technologies, recently said last month when Biden said he was going to stop offensive weapons sales to Saudi Arabia. We're not sure that he's following through on that. The bombing is continuing day in, day out. But to soothe the concerns of his shareholders, CEO Gregory Hayes got up there and said, you know, we're going to have to stop maybe selling certain weapons, but don't worry, peace is not going to break out in the Middle East anytime soon.
Wow.
And that tells you all you need to know, because it is not in their interest to have peace in the Middle East.
Right.
Right? This reminds me of something from 1984. The point of the war is not to win it. The point of the war is for it to be continuous.
Right.
You know, Donald Trump said that when he was campaigning for president. It resonated with a lot of people. We don't win wars anymore. Of course, he got in there. He didn't have the power to stop these wars. Didn't do it. Palled up with Raytheon executives. Brought him into the administration.
Right.
But it resonated for a reason. The point of the war is not to achieve objectives or to give our soldiers a mission that they can achieve. The point of the war is to keep the profits rolling in.
There was a moment in history post-Vietnam, and I think we could all sort of have a dark chuckle when we remember the terms peace dividend at the end of the Cold War. The end of those two ongoing conflicts created something called the Powell Doctrine, and the Powell Doctrine essentially said that if the United States is going to enter a war, that in fact there would be a clearly stated objective, the War Powers Doctrine would be honored, there would be an objective, a goal, clearly definable, and an exit strategy. We've forgotten that completely, haven't we?
Yeah, and we don't ask ourselves these fundamental questions. Why we're still in Afghanistan, why we still have folks in Iraq, why we're still fighting across the Middle East with our drone programs, and why we're supporting proxies and arming a lot of really unsavory characters.
Right.
Oftentimes our weapons end up in the hands of jihadists.
Right.
But what are we doing in Afghanistan? We were there to get Osama bin Laden.
Right.
He's been dead for about 10 years now, and we found him in Pakistan. Right? Saddam Hussein has been gone for a long time, and they never had those weapons of mass destruction against Al-Qaeda. But when you ask people these fundamental questions, they can't give you an answer.
Right.
So they'll tell you something like, we want to support human rights and set up democracies in the Middle East. But Yemen and our ongoing relationship with Saudi Arabia will tell you that that is not the motivation. If our motivation was human rights, we would not be supporting the worst human rights catastrophe in the world. We would not be arming to the teeth the worst human rights abusers in the world in Saudi Arabia. It's not about taking care of our soldiers. It's not about taking care of our citizens and the needs of our people. It's about corruption. parties and Washington, D.C. is no longer making decisions to fix the problems that we have. They want to keep the gravy train a-rolling.
Right. You know, and we refuse to learn from history. If we look at what happened to Iran, you know, we were discussing this with Paul just before we started our chat. What was fascinating to me, and sad, actually tragic, was that when we assassinated an Iranian general, there was this hue and cry and cheers and chants of USA, 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 because we had taken out an evil Iranian. And I pointed out to folks, and I call American politics short attention span theater, and I pointed out to folks that why were we, what makes you happy about the death of a human being? Well, the evil Iranian regime in 1970, wait. What happened in 1976 was a direct reaction to the CIA-sponsored, and by the way, this is documented, this isn't conspiracy theories, the CIA-sponsored takeover of by Middle Eastern standards, a democratically elected government, and being replaced by, again, sound familiar? A Shah who engaged in constant abuses of civil rights, if not outright torture and murder. And somehow we wake up and we understand our own truth, and we refuse to acknowledge why people hate us. And what was stunning about that moment, that weekend, was how few people knew that, in effect, when it comes to Iran, we started it. Again, I have seen the enemy and he is us. And people denied that. They said, oh, that didn't happen. And I had to dig through history books because we've whitewashed American history post-76, post-Carter administration. We've eliminated references to American intrusion into the internal affairs of a sovereign nation so that literally no one knows the history anymore.
I think this is especially relevant considering everything that we've gone through here in the United States, with Russiagate and the hue and cry over the possibility of another country interfering in our election, as if this is not something that is routinely done by the United States. Pick a country in Latin America, and I can almost guarantee you that we have either invaded or intervened or supported a coup or leveled vicious economic sanctions on that country.
Right.
Same with the Middle East. A lot of it is going on in Africa too. Right. The example of Iran is a good one, and it's also we should learn an important lesson from that. Something you do in 1953, overthrowing a democratically elected leader, might have consequences a generation later in 1979,
right,
with the revolution and the hostages. It's the same with our involvement in Afghanistan in the 80s. Right. We thought it was a great idea to arm the Mujahideen, right, and people like Haqqani and Osama bin Laden, because they were against the Soviets at the time. Right. But the consequences, a generation and a half later, is the formation of Al-Qaeda, and violent incidents that led to the attacks of September 11th that killed almost 3,000 of our people. We need to start thinking long-term and stop thinking about the short-term profits and the expediency that serves companies like Raytheon. Right. We need to start thinking big. Joe Biden talked about a lot of this stuff. I haven't seen much yet. Right. He has the power to do the right thing. And one of the reasons that we're out here today is to demand that he does what he said he did. Pretty simple.
Well, thank you for joining us. If I can throw in a final note, sort of echo something that we talked about at the beginning of our conversation. If you come from a Christian tradition, this is the Easter season where we talk about revival, and we talk about forgiveness, and we talk about renewal. And many Americans will look to the tragedy of the last year, 500,000 Americans dead, and they will couch that renewal and that revival in terms of the COVID pandemic. I think we can all agree, all of us who are here right now, that at the moment that we're attending whatever service, whatever tradition that we belong to, somewhere in the nation of Yemen, people will be dying at our hands. And they will not have the opportunity to celebrate a season of renewal. And quite frankly, COVID is probably the furthest thing from their minds, because we as a nation are killing them. And I'm just going to ask people to reflect on that thought and reflect on everything all of you have said so eloquently today in terms of your continuing such reasoned, such honorable opposition to what's happening in our country today. And I thank you for inviting me here today. And let's keep this conversation going.
Just one last thing.
Sure.
I completely agree with what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
Let's remember our gospel. Let's remember the words of Jesus. How you treat the least of these is how you are treating me. The poorest people and most put upon folks the world over are in Yemen right now. They're suffering justice, and they're running out of time. And we should be judged by how we are treating them. We need to change. There's something wrong in this country, and we need to stop it. We need to step back, and we need to take a look at our values and make a serious change, because we're not on the right path right now. And I think a lot of people understand.
Thank you so much. We are the Coalition, loud and proud, as always, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting today from the streets of Cambridge, Massachusetts, with folks who, and if you've ever listened to our live show, our hashtag is Take It Personally. These are folks who are out here, it's part of their lives, caring about, but most importantly, acting upon the need to end atrocities, pain, suffering, fear, death, wherever and whenever they can. And I salute all your efforts. Thank you so much.
Pleasure to be with you.
Thank you.